Okay. Good morning. Warm good morning to all. We are all present here for this webinar on cybersecurity organized by Department of ISE, JNNCE, Shimoga. The main objective of this is to know the real needs and challenges in the field of security, the causes and the process to manage the security issues in the net. Now, on this day, I would like to welcome our eminent resource person and honored guest. I would like to welcome our beloved Dean Academic, Dr. Manjunath Sir, uh, Academic Dean of JNNCE College, and also like to welcome our resource person, Mr. Basuraj Amase, Solution Delivery Lead, Deloitte, Bangalore, and is a proud alumni of our department. Uh, Along with him, I would like to also welcome our beloved HOD, Dr. R. Sanjeev Kunte sir, to this webinar on cybersecurity. Finally, I would like to welcome all the participants from various colleges to this webinar. Now, we already are late, so I would like to request our resource person to continue and to deliver this session.
Okay, thank you, Aftab sir, for that introduction. I hope I am audible, loud and clear. Uh, am I audible? Hello. Okay. Let's get started. So today we're going to be discussing on cybersecurity, basically IAM, which is identity and access management, basic concepts of identity and access management. So cybersecurity itself is a very vast subject. So if you guys want to have a career on cybersecurity, there are lots of, I mean, there is a syllabus which is already prescribed by ISE Square, which is for CISSP, which is certification for information systems and security for personnel. You can go through those syllabus, and IAM is a module in that syllabus, which we are going to talk about today. So, I mean, it consists of like different concept modules like security and engineering, security architecture, security operations, network operations, some things like that. So there are 10 different modules which you can go ahead and learn so that you can have a career on CISSP. If you want, if you are confident enough, you can go ahead and take the certification as well. But before taking the certification, be mindful that it is very like very high on what do you say, a cost, something around $200, which it costs. So yeah, so that's the basics. Today, we are going to be discussing on these things. Uh, let's have an introduction and then we'll just jump into some common terminologies, and then we'll discuss about what is SSO, how it is implemented, what are the advantages of it, what is SAML, what is OAuth and OpenID Connect, and then we'll have a quick catch up so that you can ask me if you have any doubts or any more information if you want. So yeah, uh, let's start with the basic. Largely, if you say identity and access management, if you go and read somewhere, the definition that it gives you is it's a framework of policies and technologies for ensuring that the proper people in the enterprise have the appropriate access to the resources. Okay, so that definition, if you understand, yeah, you want to say you can feel that it is pretty straightforward and simple. Well, it is not. For an enterprise to have a complete IAM structured in a way, then they have to have these, at least these five modules described in their policies and the structures. So the IAM includes five modules, which is identity management, web access management, identity governance, privileged access management, and certificate management. So identity management is something like every organization needs identity for each of its users or each of its employees. So they have to have an automated way to maintain the user identity. The they have to have an automated way to manage the identity. When I say manage, it means the identity creation, the identity updation, or let's say the deletion of an identity. So these all things would come into a picture when I say identity management. So there are different products which have been available in the market, which deals with identity management. So, a few things would go like SailPoint IIQ, CA IDM, Oracle IDM. So these are the few examples of products through which enterprise will manage the user identities. So that's the first part of IAM, and the next one is web access management. Web access management is something like uh, you have an enterprise, let's say a Facebook. So you are exposing uh, your application, web application, or be it a mobile application, any application to the external world, World Wide Web, or the internet. You have to have a control over that uh, that entire of your application. How do you control that? When I say control, you got to know who is accessing your application, who is authorized to access your application, and who can access certain resources and who cannot access certain resources. So to manage all those stuffs, there will be uh, uh, few products which are there in the market, uh, which do the web access management for you. So products like CS SiteMinder, Ping Identity, which has Ping Federate and Ping Access. There is IBM Access Manager. There is Oracle Access Manager. So these are the different products which do the work for web access management for an enterprise. The next is identity governance. Identity governance is something like it is a policy based and centralized orchestration where you can manage and govern your user identities. So there is you can there are also products available for identity governance like Oracle Identity Governance, IBM Governance Management Tool. So these are different products which the enterprise uses to manage this module. The next is privileged access management. So what is privileged access management? Privileged is something like, let's say you need an extra access to go and access certain kind of application. Let's say an enterprise have lots of servers where their application has been deployed, and an employee needs an admin access. He is logging into a server as an admin. So there not every employee of of an enterprise should have the access or an authorization to go and log in as an admin. There you will need a privileged access. So to manage these kinds of situation, there are certain products which are available there in the market, like there is HashiCorp, there is SailPoint PAM tool, which is available. So the enterprises uses these type of products to manage the privileged accesses. And then last but not limited to certificate management. Certificate is something where normally you guys might be aware of, like the root certificates or uh, the the certificates which are needed for the handshake to happen, the management of these certificates, let's say creation of the certificates, uh, when they expire, the 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 updation of the certificates and stuffs like that. To manage these kind of things, there are certain products which are available. So something like Venify. Venify is a very well-known used product to maintain certificates for a particular enterprise. So when I say IAM, these are the five mainly divided categories, modules, submodules, you can say, and you can build your career in each one of them. Uh, there are there is a completely different skill set required to do identity management, completely different skill set required for web access management, and hence on forth. So I have been working on web access management, like from throughout my career. So we will discuss web access management, what is that, and how how enterprises design and architect their solutions for web access management and stuffs like that. Okay, let's move forward. So when I talk through these are the common terminologies I usually might say. So I'll just explain in the heads up. So authentication. So what is an authentication? Authentication is an event where you will establish the identity of yourself. Let's say you are logging into Facebook. Facebook will give you a login page. You will put your username and credential and authenticate yourself. Thereby, you are saying to Facebook that a person called Basavraj is logging into Facebook, and he is an he and he when you are entering your password, you're confirming that the Basavraj, the person itself, is logging in, not the anybody else who is uh, I mean, who, like, the other person is logging in as Basavraj. So you're getting my point, right? So authentication is an event where you will prove your identity to the application or to the enterprise. So that is authentication. So nowadays there are very different ways to authenticate a user. See uh, the very vastly used is one. The common one is form based authentication, which is just displaying a user a form where you will collect the username and password of the user, and then authenticate the user. And then there are, like, nowadays you will do fingerprint authentication. And there is something called NTLM authentication. So what is that means is like uh, or an IVA, integrated Windows authentication, wherein, like, you know if you are using an enterprise given laptop or a device, whatever the applications you want to log in, you don't have to authenticate yourself. The whatever the credentials you use for logging into your laptop or a desktop, whatever machine, those credentials itself will be carried out by Windows to authenticate throughout for your organization, whatever the tasks you're gonna do. So that is an NTLM authentication for you. So those are the different kinds of authentications where you know the enterprise will go on and implement as per the need basis. The second one is authorization. Authorization is an event where like you know uh, you will say to the enterprise that you are authorized to access the application. You have all the privileges to uh, access the whatever the resource you are looking for. Let's say uh, I am Basavraj. I am logging in for Facebook, but I have authorization only to my Facebook profile. I don't have the authorization to view anyone else's Facebook profile. So if I want to, uh, access the other's Facebook profile, I have to go, you know, request authorization, stuffs like that. So that is authorization for you. MFA is multi-factor authentication where you will be asked to authenticate twice, like step by step authentication. Let's say you have entered, you would see this scenario mainly in very critical solutions where the strong authentication is required. You might have observed while logging into your bank accounts and making the transactions and stuffs like that, where you will get an additional OTP sent to your mobile, or you will have to answer few security questions which you have been set and authenticate again yourself. This is just to prove that it is actually you who is trying an attempt to log in. So that is a different layer of authentication, which is we call it as MFA or multi-factor authentication. So the next one is session. So whenever I say session, session is nothing but a cookie which is put up by your application into your web browser. So whenever you hit a browser application in your browser, you can go ahead into cookies and see there would be a random string is set as a session in your browser. So that random encrypted string that will contain the basic information of the user whenever it is logged in, or whatever the needs that application would want to have. So that is session for you. And resource. So resource is, let's say, something. uh, I have opened a browser. Let's say here, if you guys seeing, this is a URL whatever I have accessed in my browser right now. So this is www.samltool.com. The samltool.com, we call it as the FQDN, fully qualified domain name, or your domain name, simply we call it as in the networking terms. This slash generic SSO res.php is a resource. So whatever the uh, the URL string after the FQDN is contains, that we call it as a resource. Here, uh, this could be again something like ABC, again slash something like ASD, something like this. Each and everything of this string, whatever is called, it's a web page basically. So that we call it as a resource. So there are usually two kinds of resources. One is a product protected resource, and the other one is a non-protected resource. A protected resource is something like where if you feel that you should have some, you know, someone authenticated and authorized himself to access that page, that you call a protected resource. Let's say my Facebook profile login, my profile page. To go to my profile page, that resource, I have to authenticate myself. Without an authentication, I cannot log into my profile. So that becomes a protected resource.
Hmm. Just just ಆಗಿದೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸ್ಟೇಜಿಗೆ ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ ನೀವು
ವಾಯ್ಸು ಇದು ಎರಡೂ ಇದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಬೋರ್ಡ್ ಬಂದಿದ್ದು ನಾನು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ. ಇಲ್ಲ ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಏನು ತೊಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಹೌದು, ನಾನು ಕ್ಲೋಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ.
Hello. Hello.
ಸ್ಕ್ರೀನ್ ಶೇರ್ ಆನ್ ಮಾಡಿ
Uh, Can someone please let me know where did we stop?
Continue, continue.
Okay. Uh, so uh, so let's say protected resource and not protected resource. Protected resource is something where you have to authenticate yourself to access the resource. So that we call it as a protected resource, and not protected resource is something where like you do not have to authenticate yourself to uh, access the resource. For example, uh, let's say Wikipedia page, any Google search you want to do. So those are the resources where you don't have to uh, authenticate yourself. So next is the single sign-on. Single sign-on is something. It's a term we use where you log in once, you authenticate yourself once, and for the rest of the entire period of a certain amount of time, you will not authenticate again yourself, even if you are accessing different applications. So let's say uh, if you open your Gmail in your in your browser, and if you want to go to your uh, let's say your Google Maps or Google Docs, the Google will not ask for your credentials again. It will take whatever the existing session credentials which are there, which are there in your browser, and it will let you in for a for the another application account. So that seamless flow we call it as single sign-on. The next is single logout, is where like if you're let's say you have logged logged in to your Gmail account in many different devices, in one computer and in another mobile or something. If you click, if a single logout is implemented, if we click on single logout, you would be logged out in from everywhere, from whatever the devices, whatever the accounts you've been logged in, uh, you would be logged out. So whenever there is a logout happening, the session, whatever has been created on a login event, this session becomes invalidated, and the applications usually, whatever the product, the web access management products, they will remove the session from the browser. So, so that's single logout uh, in simple words. So these are the common terminologies that we usually use. So now let's see single sign-on, why we need it, and how the single sign-on is implemented. So why we need single sign-on? So let's say for an enterprise like uh, Microsoft, Microsoft has different products, very different products. Let's say Microsoft has your uh, Microsoft Office, Microsoft has uh, your different products in Office itself, where you would use this PowerPoint presentation, Word, Excel, stuff like that. And Microsoft has Azure, Microsoft has Active Directory compliances. So Microsoft has very wide variety of applications for its users and as well as its employees. So let's assume if we have to create an each separate authentication event, separate authentication logic, and if we have to write the authentication code for each and every application, whatever an organization or an enterprise is going to build. Just imagine how much the complexity it takes to maintain the user database. You would have to have a separate user database for each and every application the enterprise is going to build. And if, let's say, even if you have built it, let's say 100 applications are there, you have 100 uh, different repositories. Let's say in an event of an employee leaving an organization, they have to go and update the, you know, uh, the each and every repository of each and every 100 applications. So that is a huge task. So it comes to organizations. I mean, it gives organization maintaining 100 or a large number of repository a huge cost. So the main advantage to use a single repository and a single sign-on is the cost effectiveness. So you just have to maintain one user database and that's it. You thereby you're reducing a cost to directly 1% of whatever you're gonna spend. And it gives the user the improved usability and satisfaction. So how is this done? So if a Microsoft employee has to use 15 applications and if you have to maintain 15 different usernames or different passwords, it is the maintenance of the credentials itself is going to be a huge task for that employee. So the the usability or employee satisfaction is at a great risk when you don't have a web access management solution in place. So uh, it is obviously easier to use one credential instead of the 15 or 20 other credentials. And the, the most important one is the greater security and compliance. Uh, so whenever uh, an application, an enterprise is building its applications, the enterprise will do a security check for each and every application. The application has to maintain the industry standard security compliances. So nowadays, the single sign-on or the web access management is one such standard where the industries has standardized that if you want to call yourself a secured enterprise to share your data with or any to do the business with, you have to have the web access, the a very good structured web access management tool in place. So even not just the industry standard, the web access management tools, they will deal with the your uh, various security threats that nowadays the worldwide internet uh, would have accountable to. So something like the man in the middle attack or the traffic in surge attack. So web access management products will help you identify these kind of attacks and prevent those attacks. So that's a greater advantage for an enterprise to have the web access management products in place. So uh, when we discuss that how why we need SSO, after that, now how the SSO is being implemented in an organization or an enterprise. So here, let's say there are two usually there are two kinds of SSO solutions that have been used. One is session-based solution. Another one is the federated SSO. Uh, s- the session-based solution I'll quickly cover. This is a pretty straightforward one. If you implement any of the products that I've told you, like CS SiteMinder, uh, any of the products. Just a minute. Hello. Okay. 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 Huh. Just a moment.
Yeah. I welcome our beloved principal, sir, Dr. Shimoga, sir, principal JNNCE, and I request to say address the gathering.
Yeah, good morning to all of you. Sorry, I think I joined in between. I'm very sorry. So I could not join the beginning because of some other program. I was at 11 o'clock at the program. So I think I'm very happy that there is a session on cyber security, and well experienced person from the Deloitte is giving the talk. Really wonderful. Like I just was able to hear for a few minutes in the session. Really good. I think the at this point of time where the because of pandemic situation where everybody is into the digital mode, working from home and working from everything, learning from home, everything. And this cyber security definitely is very appropriate and very much required. Maybe of course, it is there for long, but it's not that it is introduced now. But anyway, all the more important now. The maybe in the the domain or the teaching domain anywhere. So that way, I think this session, whatever you planned, the webinar on this cyber security really helped, and I just appeal to all the participants who are. I think I'm sure that the participants who are attending are interested in this area. Not that other people are coming. Maybe more or less, more people are who are in the working in the cyber security are interested to learn, are interested in researching or teaching the subject, something like that. So now my appeal to all the faculty members or the participants who are attending this webinar is that so use the experiential sharing. It's not just say the theory session. The session given by the resource person is he is sharing his experience and the real time the whatever he applied and whatever he has learned. He is sharing this session in this session. My appeal to all of you is that please you make use of it and listen to that. Then just see what how we can transfer this knowledge to the student, and how can you use this for coming giving the project to the student, and can we do something developing our own different method, innovative method, or inventive the solution for cyber security. So I request the appeal to all of you listen to this. Then you can just, if you're able to think something which is productive and useful to the so the industry, we can give back. That will be a great help. So with this, I think I take this opportunity to thank the resource person of the day for the making his spending his time with us and then sharing the knowledge to all the participants. So thank you. And also I thank the organizing committee, Aftab and also Dr. Sanjeev Kunte for arranging this webinar. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I request Basuraj, resource person, to continue.
Okay. Thank you, respected principal, for those words. So we shall continue. Uh, till now, as far we discussed, like why an enterprise would go for web access, any web access management, product. So especially SSO, single sign-on. So now we shall discuss like how the single sign-on is implemented uh, in any organization or an enterprise. So there are mainly two ways. One is session-based SSO. The another one is federated SSO. Session-based SSO I'll quickly cover because it's an dying art, and it's a very state-old technology, and it's a pretty straightforward one. So when whatever the products, whatever I mentioned earlier, let's say CSI Minder or a Ping Federate Ping Access or an IBM access management tool, they come with this pre-fettered models to handle the session based single sign on. So this is nothing but whenever you have logged in, uh, there will be a session put on your browser. So you can, whenever you get free time, you can go ahead and look for cookies in your browser. There will be cookies. Uh, there will be cookies stored in your browser by the applications with uh, you know with respect to your domain name. So I've already told you what is the domain name, which is FQDN. So based on that session, the products will decide whether to give the user another access or not. So basically the session usually, the session would contain the username, when the user logged in, the status of the session, whether it is a valid one or not, stuffs like that. So by validating the session, usually the products will decide on whether the user would be able to, I mean, should be logging in or not. If not, the user would be challenged again for the credentials. So that is the session-based single sign-on. The next one is federated SSO, is which are very vastly used and a very new hotcake in the industry. Uh, so here, like whenever we say federation, there is a third party which would be involved in it. So I'll just give you an example. Let's say uh, I have presumed that every one of you have used Cisco WebEx or Salesforce, something like that, these tools. So let's say we call, for an example, JNNCE is an organization which is enrolled, which has the licenses to some Cisco WebEx accounts. So how the authentication, how the single sign-on would, or the federation would actually occur is the user will not go ahead and create his profile in Cisco WebEx. Instead, the user will use his profile of JNNCE and go ahead and access Cisco WebEx based on his JNNCE profile. So here we are talking two different entities, two different organizations. Hence, we call it as a federation SSO, federated SSO. There is a third party involved. It is not an SSO in the same organization or a same entity. So uh, that is federation SSO. So nowadays there are mainly two ways, or yeah, mainly two ways to uh, two industry standards to achieve this federation. The first one is SAML, which would stand as Security Assertion Markup Language. Okay, so this SAML is nothing but uh, uh, it's just an XML. Uh, it's an XML, but based on some security standards. That's why we call it as security assertion markup language. So we will just discuss how a login journey would happen through SAML. So let's say this is a login journey. Uh, Whatever there in this picture, we will connect it with a real world example. Just now I took a JNNCE is a one party, and service this Cisco WebEx is another party. So the terminologies would go like this: identity provider, service provider. So what is an identity provider? Identity provider is someone who has the ability to uh, authenticate the user and create an assertion. I will tell you what is an assertion, and I'll show you the assertion as well. So identity provider. So in our example, JNNCE becomes an identity provider because the user is using his JNNCE profile to authenticate himself for a Cisco WebEx third-party application. Now Cisco WebEx becomes the service provider. Pretty simple, straightforward terminology. Cisco WebEx is giving you the WebEx service. That's why it is a service provider. But Cisco WebEx is not authenticating the user. Instead, it is accepting something from an identity provider to to have the user to access the Cisco WebEx. That something is nothing but assertion. Assertion is nothing but a SAML. So the journey goes like user, let's say user hits uh, the Cisco WebEx URL in the browser, something like jnnce.ciscowebex.com. So once you hit that resource, service provider will connect with identity provider. WebEx Cisco will connect to JNNCE with some information. We call it as the authentication request, where it is simply a redirection to the redirection to identity provider. So uh, excuse me. Whenever the user hits Cisco WebEx, Cisco WebEx will take the user to JNNCE. So now the enterprise JNNCE has to authenticate the user. Okay. So JNNCE will display the login page for the user. So the user will enter his credentials and authenticate against JNNCE for his JNNCE profile. Okay. So the credential validation would happen against the user store of JNNCE. So now once the authentication is done and successful, it the JNNCE has a business logic to send a verification response to the service provider. What this response will have the assertion in it. Assertion is nothing but the SAML. I'll show you a SAML. How does it look like? So, so the service provider will receive the IDP SAML response. So obviously, the service provider, after receiving the SAML response, it will have to, instead validating the user, it will validate the assertion through digital certificates. There is something called digital certificate. So what is digital certificate? Digital certificate is nothing but like before I said, like the JNNC and Cisco WebEx will have an agreement. So you will use so and so number of the Cisco WebEx accounts. So for that, uh, they will have the registration for each with each other. So then there itself they will exchange their digital certificate with each other. So whenever the assertion is sent from IDP to SP, the service provider will validate the digital certificate which is attached in the assertion with the digital certificate it has in its repository for JNNCE. Once that is validated, the user gets to access the whatever the service the user has been requested for. Pretty straightforward and simple. So here the advantages, the advantages is like JNNCE being an identity provider, they have to for certain their business purposes, they have to use a third party application. So, but by using federated single sign-on or federated solution, they are not sharing their user details with uh, the service provider. When I say user details, the username or the password, something like that. They user profile. The user profile of JNNCE is maintained only in JNNCE's database. It has nowhere maintained in the service provider's database. So with that, you will have access to your user profiles. So whenever employee joins or an employee quits, or whenever there is an update to a user profile, you don't have to worry about updating it in the third party vendors or third party applications databases because you're not using it anyway. So that is a very big advantage for enterprises, both the economically as well as security wise. So said that, I told you I will show you SAML. So if you guys are seeing my screen, this is how a SAML response typically looks like. It I told you it is an XML with some security asserted with it. So you can see that it is all written in XML languages. So it starts with SAML response and it ends with SAML response always. It ends with SAML response. So here it contains variety of things like what is the protocol which is being used. Here it is SAML 2.0. Previously, the industry was using SAML 1.0 and then it moved on to 1.1. Now the standard is SAML 2.0. And this is the entity ID. So with this ID, the service provider will decide what is the identity provider it has been uh, entitled to. So this would be unique for each and every identity provider. Let's say WebEx JNNC is not the only customer for Cisco WebEx. There is TCS, there is Deloitte, there is Cognizant. So each and every organization will have its own entity ID, which is enrolled in Cisco WebEx's repository. And it contains certificate. I told you this is a digital certificate which would be validated by uh, you know uh, the service provider upon consuming the assertion. And the main part is these things, attributes. You can see it's all XML. So attributes is something where the identity provider will pass on the user information, uh, just the information, let's say name, user mail, or user last name, first name, like that, like whatever the service provider would require, would necessarily require to operate. So that is pretty straightforward. That is SAML. You can go ahead and read this, this course. This is open source. This is SAML developer tools, samltool.com. You can go ahead and read. This is pretty much industry standard, uh, which is being used. And if you are interested, you can do, your college projects as well on this, where you know you can go ahead and create an identity provider, or you can use Google service or a Facebook service as an identity provider, and you can develop your service provider application. Yeah, where you will go ahead and consume this assertion, and you will read all these values and let the user in. So this is a pretty straightforward implement. This should be a pretty straightforward implementation to make. So this is the one uh, first technology or industry standard which is being used currently. And SAML is like this. This is used between the enterprises, where for their internal usage, like only for intranet applications, like only employees or contractors, something like that. But for the end user or the internet exposed federated identity solutions, there is something called OAuth, open authorization, which is currently being used for federation. So now this is a little different technology than SAML, uh, where you know uh, let's say OAuth. If I have to tell you, let's say you are creating a profile, or you are applying for a job in Naukri, but you want to use your resume from LinkedIn. You have a resume created in LinkedIn, and you want to apply for a job in Naukri.com using LinkedIn profile. So how does it do is, it uses open authorization to fetch only your resume from LinkedIn. Now you will give authorization to Naukri app to go and fetch the resume from LinkedIn. But here Naukri cannot go ahead and fetch any other details apart from your resume. So this control based authorization or control based information sharing is what a newly added thing in enterprises these days. It is uh, every organization everywhere it is widely being used. So the authorization code flow, how it flows is like, let's say there is a client, which is here with my example, let's say uh, Naukri. Now Naukri is a client, and resource owner. Resource owner is nothing but the end user, which is you. Like, you are using both Naukri and LinkedIn, so you become a resource owner here in these terminologies. And there is something called authorization server. Authorization server is something is a server who is authenticating you and giving something back to you. Uh, and it is only for authentication purposes. It is not for any other purposes. Okay, so let's say the uh, the code flows like a client first will first will take an authorization grant from the resource owner to go ahead and access the uh, the resource from the resource server. Here, the players include client is Naukri, resource owner is you, LinkedIn is your resource server. So the client will contact first will put up a page to resource owner to get a grant. So you might have seen this whenever you might have been browsing something that the facebook.com or something wants to access from this account. Yeah, you have to click yes or no. So that is nothing but you are granting an authorization to the client whatever it has been requested for. Client will take the grant and client will go to the resource server with that authorization grant, and client will fetch the resource from the resource server. Here one thing which comes which plays an important role is uh, scope. So scope is something that where that limited access is come from. So I'll just show you the call, which how does it happen. So now the client is making a call to the resource server to get the whatever the scope or the information is required. So this simple call goes like this way. So here the authorization server.com/auth. This is the standard. Response type has to be code. There is a client ID and there is a scope. Create and delete is a scope, or here in an example, they are asking for creation and deletion scope. But in my example, whatever I've taken, you want a resume from your LinkedIn. So in the scope, you will pass whatever the resume equivalent, let's say resume. So with that, you will call the your resource server, and you in response you will get a token, something like this, access token. We call it as access token. So this will be an encrypted token. Tokens I'll explain you at the end how does token work and how to encrypt and decrypt. So once the client receives this token, it will go ahead and decrypt the token for whatever the information it has been looking for. So that's how the OAuth usually works. So uh, based on this technology, nowadays the login operations that have been taking place, which we call it as OpenID Connect. So based on this, whatever the technology I have explained, there will be login operations which would be made. I'll show you how does that happen. Let me quickly search for Zomato. I'm searching Zomato here. Zomato. Okay. So I click on login. I click on login. Here you see there is something called continue with Google. Okay. So when you hit continue with Google, you would be taken to google.com. Okay. So you are using your Google credentials to log into Zomato. Here you have to understand that these are completely two different organizations. Zomato is a different organization and a Google is a different organization. But Google is helping you log into Zomato with Google's credentials. So I'll just hit yes. I have to, this is MFA. I have to click yes, and I have been logged in now. Okay. Now Google has authenticated me and Google has redirected me back to Zomato using my Google's credentials. This technology, whatever is implemented here, we call it as OpenID Connect. Okay. Here you have to, you know, if you see the flow, here you have to understand your Zomato is nowhere validating your identity. Zomato here is redirecting you from here to Google with OAuth request. Okay. If you see the URL, it is Zomato is redirecting the user to accounts.google.com/OAuth. So after that, Google is, authenticating you, Google, and then creating a token for you. Okay. Google is creating a token for you, and Google is ultimately redirecting you back to Zomato. Here is the redirection. Finally, with this, with the tokens, here Google creates two tokens. One is access token and another one is ID token. You can see there is token, ID token itself. Okay. So Google is creating these tokens and redirecting you to Zomato. Zomato, in terms reading these tokens, these two are the tokens. Okay. One is access token and ID token. Zomato is reading these two tokens, and with the trust established with Google, Zomato is entering you to log in to Zomato. Okay. So access token and ID token. I said ID token, access token is something where it will contain, uh, the user, whatever the accesses which have been given to Zomato by Google. Here it is a login operation. And ID token is something where, you know, the user details uh, that would be present, like let's say user's first name, user's last name, email ID, something like that. So those two are the tokens which the Zomato will receive from Google. Here now, whatever the tokens they have, the Zomato has received, we call them as they are usually JWTs. That is JSON Web Tokens. So they are easy to decrypt. So they come like this in a string which is encrypted, everything. Once you decode them, the tokens would contain three different layers to them. In the header of the token, it will say what is the algorithm which is being used to encrypt or encode this token and what type of token it is. Here, since we are talking about JWTs, it is a JWT. Usually there are different kinds of tokens. One is bearer token and stuffs like that. But industry-wide standard JWT used for ID tokens. The next layer is your payload, where the token, once you decode the information, whatever has been passed in the token, it will be contained by a payload. It is usually the structure is like this always. It would be in pair, the description and the content. Here the description is subject, the content. Name is John Day. IAT is some this is their business logic. It actually some timestamp whatever they are sharing here. So this is a payload data, the JWT which will contain. The last one is signature. Here, how the signature is validated is, once you decode it, you will get a signature. Again, a random string, a decoded, an encoded string. So how to make sure that the data in this token is not altered is by verifying the signature. How to verify the signature is, you just have to take the algorithm from here. You have to take the payload data. You have to take the payload and you have to encode this string with whatever the algorithm that has been passed in the header. If you encode that, you will also get a string which is 256-bit character. Okay, and then whatever the string you have got, you have to match that with the signature, whatever there in the signature. So if those both of those two strings match, you have then it is said that the JWT whatever is being received, it is a valid one and it has sent by a trusted third party, and the data in the JWT is not uh, altered. So you are checking all the aspects of a data transfer risk. Okay, so that's how you would decode a certain token, and you can use that for your internal purpose, whatever the applications. And here also, any interested students, they can easily make the projects with us. Google is something where you can directly go ahead and use Google as authorization a server, take the make the calls, necessary calls to get the tokens from the server, from Google, and build an app to consume those tokens, decrypt the tokens, read the information in the token, and let the user in. So it is very simple and straightforward logic to build, and you can do these codes can be built in any languages. This is not respected, I mean, uh, restricted only to Java or only to .NET or PHP. You can simply build this logic even in a JavaScript. Okay, you can just go through the materials and you can build up an application, for yourself to let an user user login using his Google credentials. So this technology is been a game changer in the industry now, because you might have seen this doesn't only work with web, but it works this technology works with APIs as well. When I say APIs, your mobile applications will come into this as well. Even when you use the Zomato app in your mobile, it is using this technology to log you in from Google. Whenever you see, you know, you use all your different kinds of applications in your mobile, let's say Book My Show, or let's say anything, phone pay, Paytm, anything. If you want to use, go ahead and use Google's credentials, you can go ahead and use it. This has reduced a lot of effort for end users, and this has brought in a lot of usability and easier use. So that's the OpenID Connect for you guys. That's a basic. So here is what I have been uh, thought of to share with you guys. My urge is to take up these two technologies and develop, a product of your own or an application of your own where it uses SAML, where it uses, OpenID Connect. This gives you a uh, very good learning curve, and you can always go ahead and say whenever you're giving those interviews or anything, like, I have built an application for, which consumes SAML or which consumes OpenID Connect, which is very widely used, and this is the most advanced version of authentication which is present there. So I now open the forum for any questions or any doubts or anything, any more information you require. So
If anybody has any doubts or questions, they can raise their questions. Any questions? If there are no questions, we will be ending the session. Fine. The feedback link will be provided to you in the chat box. You can check that and give your valuable feedbacks. Fine. And you will be getting the certificate to your registered email address. Okay then. Thank you. I
okay, then I think we are good to wind up. Uh,
on behalf of all the staff of Department of Information Science and Engineering, JNNCE Shimoga, I'm really thankful to our resource person, Mr. Baswaraja Masi. He has given a beautiful session, and really the session was very informative, by which we could be able to analyze the things that are going in current situation in cybersecurity. And he has given a lot of, he has taken real-time examples in order to see or in order to tell you the things that are going on. Really thankful to him. Thank you, Baswaraja Masi.
yeah, Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. And looking forward to many more.
Sure. And for
Yeah,
the
okay.
participants, feedback link has been given. Do give your feedback. Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Anurag.
Thank you. Bye.